Descartes, as we said last time, is the father of modern philosophy. And you might think the father of modern philosophy would like philosophy, but Descartes did not like philosophy as much as he liked mathematics. Can you all see that well? It's subjective. I see.
It looks amazing. It's like the black hole by Spinal Tap.
Oh my gosh. Oh, hold it. Am I going to hit? You know, if we had some students in here doing homework or using their laptops, we can give you all some space if you don't put stuff back together again. But when my colleagues do it, and they rip out the computer that's here because they want to use their laptop to show a PowerPoint, there's nothing wrong with that. It's set up to do that. But put it back. Oh, okay. So, all right, so that'll work. Somebody did a end run around things. Yeah, I may have to kick out something if we don't get a high enough audio. But anyway, we have Descartes' Meditations, and the long title of the Meditations is Meditations on First Philosophy. First philosophy is basically, it's metaphysics, it's the most fundamental principles of your view of the world. I mean, to put it in a non-technical way. And so Descartes is known as the father of modern philosophy because he basically tried to start everything over again from scratch. He thought a lot of beliefs personally are ones he accepted from childhood and wanted to question, but also he thought a lot of dead wood had crept into philosophy. I once had a summer job which was a whole lot like work, which involved hauling away, dead tree branches and other branches that were cut. And this is one of the things he wants to do, is eliminate some of the dead wood from philosophy. Because if some of his most fundamental principles are false, then any beliefs that are derived from them might be equally as doubtful. So basically, he does the same thing that Plato asks us to do in the Allegory of the Cave. Examine our beliefs and try to weed out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. But Descartes, while he uses some skeptical arguments, is not at rock bottom a skeptic. He does not want to end in skepticism. What Descartes wants to do is, as you see, establish a lasting base for science and philosophy. He wants to do for science and philosophy, for scientific and philosophic knowledge, the same thing that Euclid did for the basic principles of geometry. Because one of the reasons why Descartes did not like philosophy as much as he liked mathematics, and he is the inventor of analytic geometry, is that things seem to be settled in mathematics. Remember, non-Euclidean geometries didn't come along till much, much later, hundreds of years after Descartes, right? Geometries built on the surface of the sphere where the basic axioms of Euclid don't hold, right? Where the shortest distance between 2 points is not a straight line, it's a curved line. But people in Descartes' day were going back and questioning the basic principles of Euclidean geometry. And if you remember some of your plane geometry, you have the theorems, right? And there's some of the basic truths you're working with. Then you have some of the corollaries to the theorems. Now, some theorems are proved from other theorems, but if you trace everything back, you might remember that at rock bottom, the whole system is derived from, I think it's 5 fundamental axioms or postulates. So you could say, well, how is it that we know that the theorems in Euclidean geometry are true? Well, you can derive them from other theorems using inference rules that we know lead you from truths to truths. And how do we know that some of the theorems are true ultimately? Well, we can trace them ultimately back to the axioms. Everything rests on the axioms, right? So they're derived from the axioms using reliable inference rules. But if you say, well, how do I know the axioms are true? Well, I think I mentioned this last time, but bears repeating. You know the axioms are true because they are supposed to be self-evidently true. In other words, they're supposed to be so simple and their truth is supposed to be so clear that all you have to do is hear a proposition like the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? And I think I drew on the board last time, didn't I? I mean, if you had 3 lines, right? So let's suppose these were equal in length, A, B, and C. A is equal to C, B is equal to C. Well, so A must be equal to B. Things equal to the same thing are equal to one another. Say, well, of course. How could it be otherwise? Well, what Descartes is looking for is a fundamental principle or some fundamental principles that are going to function in his system in the way the basic axioms do in Euclidean geometry. They're going to be something on which he thinks and hopes he can found the whole of knowledge, right? But in order to get at those, or at least that one principle, he uses a method that gets various names. Thank you. The one that I think is used most is 1830, and then it's 1832. You all got that? I'm telling you, folks, I am historically challenged. You know, 1066, the Battle of Hastings. I took a whole year of Western Civ. You know what I got out of it? The Huns used to eat raw meat, and they would warm it up a little bit by putting it between their leg and their horses. They were riding down, trying to lop off somebody's head in the next town. You say, come on, Morass, you're kidding about that. That's about all I remember from 3 semesters, 3 quarters. We were on the quarter system in college of Western Civ. And I never could keep the dates straight. That's why I don't ask you dates. You know, it's enough for me to remember them. But to go back to this, so what was I saying? He wants to demolish his current beliefs. And what was I going to put on Pardon? Oh, yes, yes. His method. The one that I think is used most often is methodic doubt. It's also sometimes called methodological skepticism. All right. If I use hyperbole to make a point, what do I do? Yeah, exaggerate, right? Another name that's often used is hyperbolic doubt. And I like that because it lets you know that the kind of doubt Descartes is talking about is not your ordinary doubt, right? That this is an exaggerated theoretical doubt used as a way of getting at these fundamental principles. In other words, Descartes doesn't want to end up a skeptic. He doesn't want to end up in doubt. But in order to find some principles or a principle that is beyond doubt, he tries to doubt everything to cut through and find that. Well, we're going to go through the test at the end of the period rather than the beginning because there weren't enough people in here to do it at the beginning. All right. So he wants to demolish, excuse me, a lot of his current beliefs. How does he do this? Well, and I follow the meditations pretty closely in this PowerPoint, by the way. Well, he knows it would be unnecessary and, as I said, practically impossible for him to prove them all false, the ones that he wants to eliminate. He says, I don't need to do that. All he has to do is raise skeptical argument. What a skeptic does is withhold assent from a proposition. Right? A skeptic says, you know what, maybe that's true, maybe it's false. But I'm not going to commit myself either way. I'm just going to be skeptical about it. And so it'll be sufficient for him to eliminate a principle if he adopts a principle of withholding assent from any propositions that aren't completely certain or beyond doubt. And even though he hasn't proved them as false, he's going to set them on the side as if they were false. Now let me ask you again, is there anyone who hasn't taken the objective part of this test? Okay, the Scandra. All right. Move right along. Okay, so how does he do this? Well, how many beliefs do you have? Could you even count? He knows also that this would be an undoable project. I keep on forgetting to put a new legal pad in. Oh, wait a second. No, I should have one. I'm ahead of myself. Doggone, I'm better than I thought I was. I have it more together than I thought I did. I actually do have something I can pass around as a roll. And yes, folks, we're gonna try to get you out of here. I don't know, probably between 7 and 5 after or something. And you know why, folks? Because I live in the heart of Baltimore City, in Hamden, Hon. And it would absolutely ruin my day if I got shot on the way home by National Guard. I mean, that would not be fun, right? So, you know, it was like that old poster in the 60s, just one atom bomb can ruin your whole day. So, okay, yes, PKA. And this is for 15. Okay, let me pass that around while we're okay, so he knows also that this project is going to be an undoable project if he had to go through individual beliefs. What he's talking about here, when he says he need only look at the most fundamental principles on which they rest, pretty much the principles he's talking about are principles that define a whole class or group of beliefs. So, in other words, he can raise a doubt about whole classes of beliefs, and that, you know, means he doesn't have to worry about going through the individual. So, should these, you know, defining principles that define classes of beliefs be doubtful, any beliefs that they define are going to be doubtful. Descartes is a rationalist in the tradition of Socrates and Plato, right? In other words, he's going to try to convince us that the best way to obtain real knowledge is through reason, thank you, and that reason gives us an end to knowledge that is better than what the senses can do. So it should not surprise you that in the tradition of Plato, he goes after knowledge by the senses right off the bat. Remember, for Plato, what my senses tell me is only about stuff in this world, and at best, it can only give me some true opinion. It's not going to give me knowledge with a capital K. You know, only my reason can give me that. Well, Descartes in that same line, right? So, so the first principle he looks at defines a class of beliefs that we have via the five senses. And he says, it's obvious that some beliefs we get from the five senses are doubtful. Beliefs maybe about very small objects or distant objects. And I think I recall even reading this in the Meditations. We used to have students at the University of Virginia in Intro to Philosophy read the whole thing, right? But it was a harder, way to do it, of course. But at any rate, I mean, suppose you're on the beach in the morning and you see something ahead of you, you're taking a walk, and it's kind of foggy, and the sun isn't entirely up. And you say, well, there's a seagull in front of me. And you get a little closer, and notice it's not walking around like you normally see a seagull. And you get even closer, and you wonder, why isn't it flying away? And then finally you get close enough to recognize that it's not a seagull at all. It's only a strangely shaped piece of driftwood on the beach that from a distance looked like a seagull. You know, this is the kind of thing he's talking about. And they knew about optical illusions in Descartes' day, right? They knew about the old bent stick in the water trick, right? You know, that you did in high school physics, right? You put a ruler in water, and because of the difference in diffraction rating or whatever between the air and the water, the stick looks bent. But or the ruler looks bent. It's not really bent. You take it out, it's straight. But it looks bent. When you put it in the water, they knew about stuff like that. But Descartes says, yeah, sure, there are some beliefs that I get from the senses that seem kind of doubtful. But he says there are other things the senses tell me, and among them are things about what are going on around us. That none of us doubt that we're seated at a real desk or table, whatever you want to call it, in a real chair. We're really on the third floor of a building. You know, there's a floor under us, a ceiling above us. You know, we don't doubt the things that are going on, you know, and that we're in a room full of other people, right? But he says, so some of the things that seem to be beyond doubt are what we immediately perceive. It seems certain to Descartes that he's sitting by the fire. He's in his night clothes. It says dressing gown, but it's more like a night shirt. He says, how can I doubt these things? The setting of the meditations is winter. He's in his living room. He's seated in his favorite easy chair. He's got a big old cast iron stove going with a fire in it. Probably not a fireplace. You know, he's sitting there holding a piece of paper, writing his meditations. You know, he gets alone. Descartes was a bachelor, and so he, you know, could stay in bed late and think about mathematics and philosophy. He was independently wealthy, at least for a good part of his life, so he didn't have to have a day job, even a teaching job, and he could stay in bed till noon. This kind of did him in his old age, because for whatever reason, and again, I haven't thought it worth spending a lot of time researching this, but your book talks about it a little bit. At the end of his life, he took a job as personal philosophy tutor to Queen Christina of Sweden. Now, Queen Christina was not a figurehead monarch, right? Not like, you know, Queen Elizabeth of England, who's there for ceremonial functions, but she doesn't really run the state from day to day. Well, Queen Christina really did, and so she had a very busy, demanding schedule. So the time she had free in her busy schedule to discuss philosophy with Descartes was between the hours of 5 and 6 in the morning. And this is in cold Sweden. Well, remember, here's Descartes. He's used to staying in bed till noon. Not used to getting up in the middle of the night with the chickens. And so Descartes basically caught a cold that I guess went to pneumonia, and it did him in at the end of his life. So he says, how can I doubt this stuff? Well, how does he raise a doubt? Well, Descartes says, haven't I had some very vivid dreams before where it seemed just as certain to me that I was sitting here in the living room, you know, by the fire, and I awoke from the dream, and I found that I was lying in bed in my bedroom in my night clothes, and I wasn't here at all. So he says, well, so I had some experiences that seem as real as this does now, but on awaking I discovered that my beliefs that I was in the living room were false. I was lying unclothed in bed. So he raises a $64,000 question. Well, could I be dreaming now? And you say, well, surely I can tell that I'm awake. I could do things like notice that my eyes are open, shake my head, reach out, touch my hand, say that's a real hand, I'm awake. What do you think Descartes is going to say about this? Yeah, that's just basically his reply is, well, wait a second, couldn't I be dreaming that I was doing all this stuff? You know, and now you may or may not agree with him here, but he says all these what seem to be such sure tests, none of these obvious tests work. They all fail. He says because I can be dreaming that I'm doing all these things. So Descartes can't point to anything that's a sure sign that he's awake now. Well, notice what this does then with the experiences he's having that seem to be so reliably a part of reality. Now he's raised a doubt about whether they're real or whether those experiences might be fictitious, happenings in a dream. So he's raised a doubt about what his senses tell him. And he says, maybe I don't have hands and a body at all. And maybe what seems to be so real are just fictitious dream images. Now, had I not forgotten the video, one of the things that I like to play here is, maybe one of the most famous scenes from the first Matrix, where, where you get the distinction. But Descartes raises a view of the world that persisted for almost 200 years after him. That is, that what we are immediately aware of is our own inner mental life, our own sensations, what Locke will call ideas, what Hume will later call perceptions. And that raises questions about whether what we immediately experience relates to anything out there independent of us. So Descartes raises the possibility that maybe my mind's creating all this. What 20th century philosophers said is, well, hey, if we listen to Descartes, for all we know, we could all be brains in a vat, right? And our mind is dreaming up all this stuff. You can see why the Matrix, and was anyone going to do something from the Matrix for their talk? I mean, it's one of the things that, in that scene, basically the premise is that it's post-nuclear winter. The Earth is surrounded by this cloud. The machines have taken over the world. And they can't get enough energy from sunlight because of the cloud of nuclear winter that blocks the sunlight in order to be able to keep on running. So what they've done is essentially enslaved human beings and made them living batteries producing energy. But in order to pacify them, this computer program has been, fed into their psyche, to their minds, and they're in these pods, enslaved and asleep like brains in a vat. That's the real world. But they think, because the Matrix has created a false world for them, that instead of being in the future, that they're living in 20th century small town America, that they're getting up, they're seeing their kids off to school, they're going to work, go to church on Sundays, doing mundane tasks like paying their taxes, and all the while, none of this is real. all of this is a world created for them by a computer program. Now, of course, computers aren't around in Descartes' day, so he speculates that maybe the mind is generating all this stuff. And so later does the skeptic Hume. But if we're only first acquainted with something inside us, it really does pose a problem of how you get from that to saying that we've got reliable knowledge of a world that's outside of us and that exists independently of us. And the seeds of that are in Descartes. So, even fictitious things can have real parts. Well, we're not going to worry about this one, but this is a much more important slide. This dream conjecture calls into question not only common sense beliefs about what his senses tell him about what's going on in the room around him, what he immediately experiences, but they call into question the reliability of the knowledge or supposed knowledge that is gained in the observational sciences, right? Because they depend on observations of the senses or observations of the senses aided by equipment like microscopes and telescopes, as you can see in some of the slides. So he's able to question, at this point, raise a doubt about knowledge that is based on the senses and even scientific knowledge that fits that description. Now, he doesn't believe that this raises a doubt about all of his knowledge. Now, I've always had a problem with what Descartes says here, because in a dream, it's like Walt Disney's movie Fantasia. Stuff seems to go into and out of existence at will. And if that's the case, how do you know that 2 + 3 = 5? But Descartes is convinced that even if he's dreaming about a square, the square has still got to have 4 sides, right? Even in a dream, 2 + 3, the basic principles of arithmetic are still going to hold. So he says, this conjecture that I might be dreaming cannot allow me to raise the doubt about abstract mathematical knowledge, stuff from arithmetic and geometry. He says, these sciences are still certain and indubitable, beyond doubt, even if they're about fictitious objects that I'm dreaming about. So how does he raise the doubt about this stuff? Well, if you thought that Descartes is raising a real hyperbolic, way out in left field doubt by conjecturing that he might be dreaming all this stuff up, where he goes next really raises an out in left field doubt. He talks about the qualities of things. I'm going to, for the sake of time, go past. So here's the second principle, and it concerns these mathematical truths that they're beyond doubt. He says, could anything enable me to cast doubt on such seemingly perfect knowledge? Could anything ever make me think that I go wrong in adding 2 + 3 or counting the sides of a square? Well, in order to make what Descartes says here a little more believable, and I said in the early class, I don't need to see any hands here. And then one of my students raised their hand and says, oh, yeah. Has anyone here ever gotten less than 100 on a math test? Right? Have you ever screwed up along the way? You're doing a problem. Now, of course, the best screw-ups were the ones where you made an error on line 2 and then another error on line 7 that canceled out the error on line 2, and you still came out with the right answer. you know, and all you did was circle it, and your teacher looked at it and said, "Oh, you got the right answer." But you had made two errors that canceled each other out. But right, I mean, we can go astray, you know, when we're doing a mathematical proof. Now, suppose there was an evil entity bent on just messing you up, even more so than your professors take delight in messing you up, right? That's what we're all about, right? No. Suppose you had an evil entity bent on making you mess up every time you did a math problem. You know. Well, if you think of it that way, you can kind of get an idea of where Descartes is going with this, and it doesn't seem as far out as you think. Now, this is what some people call as evil genius conjecture. He talks about an evil genius or an evil demon. Says it probably would be inconsistent with God's goodness. And we already looked at Descartes' version of the ontological argument, right? He says, it would be inconsistent with the goodness of God to say that he's messing you up systematically like this. Now, he does raise a question that he never answers very well. God allows us to be deceived sometimes, why not always? But he says, well, look, Descartes is a good Catholic boy. He doesn't want to get into trouble with the church, so he can't speculate that God might be messing us up here. And he doesn't really want to do that. Plus, he needs God to bail him out in the end. So he brings in this imaginary creature, the evil genius. He says, if God is the source of goodness and truth, why may I not instead be constantly deceived by some malicious demon? Some people translate it an evil genius, right? So some evil entity is making me, in other words, all of my life, I thought that 2 plus 3 equals 5. It was really 6. But the evil demon's been messing me up all my life in that belief. I know this is a hard one to, but here we're dealing with way out in left field theoretical doubt. But Descartes thinks that even if this is a way out in left field theoretical doubt, it still enables him to raise a doubt about a lot of different things. He says a powerful enough demon could delude me in a lot of the beliefs and judgments I make about the world, about the reality of the skies, the quote, the air, the earth, color, shape, sounds, even the abstract stuff. And even about whether I really have a body and hands and eyes, right? I might be a brain and a back. Descartes doesn't say it that way. So he said all this can be doubted and set aside as if false. So at this point in the story, you say, is our story ever going to have a happy ending? Is Descartes just going to end up in abject skepticism and nihilism? No. What's he looking for? You may remember Archimedes, right? Who says that, the power of leverage is I didn't do so well in mechanical drawing either. The power of leverage is so great, Archimedes says, that if I had a big enough lever, I could even lift the earth. But what do you need? You need a fixed point to rest that lever on. And that's what it means by Archimedes' fixed point. Archimedes claimed movement of the entire earth is possible, but you need one immovable fixed point. And relate to the present discussion? Well, the point is finding at least one true truth that is absolutely beyond doubt is going to be that immovable fixed point that he can rest everything else on. So Descartes then longs to find at least one unshakable truth on which to rest the whole of knowledge. And yes, folks, our story does have a happy ending. He says, concerning whether he should doubt his own existence, he observes, even if he has authored all his own thoughts, even if he's dreaming, he can't get away from the proposition that he is something while he's doing all this. He must exist in order to be creating this false world for himself. Even if he has convinced himself that there's absolutely nothing in the world, no sky, no earth, minds or bodies, he has to exist to convince himself of this. In other words, even if he's doubting everything, the one thing that he can't doubt is that he is there to do the doubting. Or, if you're talking about being deceived by the evil genius, if he's being deceived in all his beliefs by the evil genius, the one thing he cannot doubt is that he is there to be deceived. So, his own existence and the certainty of his own existence becomes the immovable truth that Descartes was looking for. He says a deceptive demon is unable to make my existence doubtful. Even if he's constantly deceiving me, I have to be around to be constantly deceived, right? So, the way he gets out this first truth, this axiom on which he wants to base everything is, and I'm keeping an eye on the time, I'm stopping in a few minutes. He says, the proposition I am, I exist is necessarily true every time I pronounce it or conceive of it in my mind. This is his Archimedean point, the indubitable, that is an axiom that's beyond doubt. The indubitable axiom on which he can base everything. Now, we know it better. I mean, if you heard anything about philosophy before you took this philosophy course, you probably heard this next phrase, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, therefore I exist. That's the way he expresses it in the Discourse on Method. So that becomes the central truth of his entire philosophy, and I think this is going to be a good place to stop. But we'll do a little bit more of that later. I'm going to stop this for right now.